What's going on, everybody? My name is C4. Welcome back to the channel. And unfortunately, this week of no videos isn't because I was invited to go to Orlando and check out the new college football game. I got something even better. The flu and strep throat and an ear infection and everything. And we're finally starting to feel a little bit better. So we will have a brand new rebuild dropping on the channel on the weekend. And we'll return to the Honey Hunters as soon as possible. I feel like today, with the hype still around college football 25, and I've got this question asked quite a bit on the Twitters, or X, whatever you call it, on the YouTube comments. What are the best dynasties? C4, who are you considering for your college football 25 dynasty? What should I use as a dynasty? And what I'm going to do here today is give you the definitive list, S down to D, of teams you should consider for your first college football 25 dynasty. But before I make my list, you guys, comment down below what school you guys are excited to take over for your first college football 25 dynasty. I'd love to get a vibe check amongst the community about who the popular schools are. For me, I'm probably leaning towards a team builder situation where I can create my own team. But if the team builder, it's not, if it just say it's not as great as we want it to be, there's about 4 to 5 schools right now that I'm heavily considering, which will likely be exposed in this list when you guys see my S tier schools. But I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking and see if it lines up with what I'm thinking. All right, let's start with the D tier. Now, Missouri State, Delaware. Sorry if you're a Joe Flacco fan. I just don't think they're going to be in college football 25, and their logos are here on the tier list, so I had to include them. But we got the big 4 in the D tier. This is like the why are you picking these teams as your dynasty. And I think it's self-explanatory. Obviously, Michigan's been one of the best teams in college football over the last couple of years. Same with Ohio State. Same with Georgia. Same with Alabama. You're kind of in situations where it's not going to be overly difficult. You're only picking these teams if you're homers of these teams. The only team out of these that I think you can make a slight argument that they could be in C tier is Alabama because of the post-Nick Saban era. Makes it a little more intriguing, but I kind of view it in the same context of like a New England Patriots rebuild in Madden. Especially now. Patriots got a brand new quarterback. They have a pretty bad roster. Post-Belichick era. So the argument can be there that it's interesting, but they still have the stink of their dynasty, the stink of year after year, almost decades of success, which for me have to keep Alabama in the D tier. Now we're going to move to the C tier. The C tier is going to be a mix between teams that are in the discussion for D tier, where it's like you're only really picking them unless you're a homer of the team. The only argument to be made to praise them is you are a homer of the team and you want to see them get over the hump. And then I'm going to kind of go with the more cupcakey schools that I just feel like don't really offer nearly as much as some of the other schools, be it storyline, be it jerseys, be it stadium, be it roster, etc., etc. So starting in the C tier, I'm going to put Oregon. They're going to have one of the highest rated rosters in college football 25, so they're pretty much there's a super team. But you also make the argument Oregon has the best jersey combos. They're probably going to have 37 different jerseys, and most of them, personally, my style, I love them. But let's be honest, Ducks are going to be an absolute juggernaut next year and the year after. And I think they're just really recruiting very well. They get that Nike money. I think you're only really being Oregon if you're a fan of Oregon. Same goes with Notre Dame. Another team's going to be a very good roster. Now, the argument when you go and look at Notre Dame is they are independent. So you can have the potential journey of moving into a big-time conference, be it, Big 10, Big 12, ACC. You have a lot of different variables that you could do there. But ultimately, it's still Notre Dame. They're still an incredibly generic school in terms of popularity. Been there, done that. I feel like that kind of fills that argument. Same goes, I go Penn State. Now, getting them over the hump, that's the argument. If you pick a school like Penn State, you're going to have great rivalries. You're going to have a roster that's just going to be athletic freak after athletic freak. But what kind of rebuild needs to get done there? Not a whole lot. Same with USC. Sure, post Caleb Williams there, but you still are going to have probably some of the best recruiting in the country. Your roster's really stacked. And you might have the impossible task of building a somewhat competent defense with USC. You got to rebuild, overhaul that entire defense. But for the most part, just kind of a boring pick, to be honest with you. You have Washington, who has a new head coach, but I still think you're going to have a team that's obviously had a lot of IRL success over the last couple years. And I think the only really argument you can make for Washington is you're a fan and you want to get them over the hump. Same with Oklahoma. I mean, in the college football playoff era, we'll throw Clemson in there as well. 2 schools that recently have gone over some changes, but generally in this playoff era have been one of the more dominant teams. They featured there. They put up some big-time records. I think you also could probably squeeze LSU into that mix. Like, you're not going to be playing with these teams unless you're a fan of those teams. Same with Florida State. Now, Florida State get a little bit of that revenge tour after getting robbed of the college football playoff last year. but I still think they're going to be one of those rosters that's going to be very, very good, 90+, arguably top 10 out the get-go. Why? Get yourself a challenge. And speaking of rosters and starting points, I think that is something that needs to be talked about. Ole Miss has been throwing an insane amount of money in the transfer portal. I would think maybe of the surprising teams, when you look at the ratings when the game first drops, I think Ole Miss could be shockingly right up there in the top 10. They have brought in a ridiculous amount of players throughout the portal the last couple of years. You know, Lane Kiffin absolutely cooking, especially if you're a Rebel fan. But I think from a roster standpoint, gonna be boring. Texas, probably gonna be super overpowered as well. I can imagine Quinn Ewers gonna be one of the highest rated quarterbacks. You got Arch Manning, it's gonna be a little bit played out. You know, moving to the SEC could be interesting. Different challenges, new rivalries, but ultimately not a lot of rebuild needs to go on there. We're gonna throw Utah into the mix. Much like Oregon, two of the bigger teams, name-wise, that has never won a national championship, so an idea of trying to pursue that first ever kind of makes sense, but I imagine Utah is going to be another one of those teams that's going to boast an elite ranking. Now we're going to kind of go to the not great teams that I just think there's not a whole lot there in terms of exciting roster. The jerseys aren't that electrifying. They're kind of just ho-hums teams. We're going to go Middle Tennessee. We're going to go Buffalo. We're going to go Louisiana Monroe, Southern Miss, Miami, Ohio, Ball State, Nevada, UConn, Memphis, New Mexico State, Kent State, Eastern Michigan, and Louisiana Tech. Now, if those are one of your teams that you're planning on using for your dynasty, don't take this as a shots fired. I was literally, when I was going through the intense study and calculation to make this list, I was just like, there's not much here. There's not a whole lot there. I couldn't spin a storyline, an angle that makes these teams interesting. You could be from these states. You might have a favorite NFL player that went to one of these schools. Like, you know, you're a Khalil Mack stan and you want to rebuild the Buffalo Bulls or whatever the hell they're called. But ultimately, not a lot of great jersey combos if you're just looking from an unbiased perspective. You're looking at what teams are going to be interesting. You know, not a whole lot there. I mean, you can make the argument for all these teams that they kind of suck and making them into a dynasty, making them in the powerhouse. That's really all they offer, I think, as potential dynasties in college football 25. And maybe the most disrespectful of this is I also threw in Utah State, Indiana, Minnesota, Liberty, Fresno State, San Jose State, and Arkansas State because I just had no opinion either way of where to rank them. There's nothing schools, in my opinion. Don't see a lot of pros and or cons. If you were passionate about wanting to use one of these teams, you had a great story, I'd go sure. And if you said these teams suck, I hate them, I'd go sure. It makes sense. Sorry, you're kind of in that purgatory of who cares. That's why you go and see. Now moving on to the B tier, where again, we're just progressively just kind of working our way up that some of these teams aren't, you know, even in the B tier. Are we really considering these schools top of the list, of your personal list for dynasties? Again, a lot of these bigger schools, unless you're a fan of the school, I don't think there's a lot of arguments to be made that you'd really want to. I mean, we're going to start with a lot of the SEC schools. You got Arkansas, you got Mizzou. Mizzou's going to be pretty damn good. Luther Burden, Brady Cook, some of the highest rated players. Same with Tennessee. But, you know, with these teams in the SEC, good rosters. Maybe not so much Arkansas, but Tennessee and Mizzou, good rosters. But getting them over the hump could be the fun challenge there. And you're going to have a pretty good four-year period. I think Mississippi State falls into that. I think Texas A&M falls into that. I think especially, too, when you look at A&M, maybe even Ole Miss, these are like two of the big dogs as far as the transfer portal is concerned. How they decide to utilize the transfer portal mechanic in college football 25, if there are different budgets, which obviously there's going to be. I'm thinking of like in FIFA, right? In FIFA, when you start your career mode in FIFA, you could choose to have like basically a Saudi takeover where you have $1 trillion, you can sign all the transfers and make all the trades that you want to. And I kind of feel like A&M could be in that bubble. Maybe not as overpowered as Ole Miss, I think, in terms of base roster, but I definitely could see Texas A&M having an insane budget that you can work with. I'm going to throw Kentucky into that list as well. They've been pretty busy in the transfer portal. I think you got good teams like Iowa. They're going to have a pretty good roster out the get-go. I don't think a whole lot of work needs to be done. You got UCLA, post-Chip Kelly era. Kind of interesting, but also a school that's really had decent, consistent success. I don't know why you would rush to start with UCLA. You have Oregon State. I love the jerseys. I am a homer for the orange jerseys. A little bit of a transitioning period there. You're losing your top skill position player in Martinez. You're losing your quarterback in DJU and your head coach. So it is a transitioning period The Beavers could be interesting. You have Purdue, who've always kind of been solid. The spoiler makers never won a national title, and I think that's the next spin here for B. The schools that are probably going to be pretty decently rated in college football 25, but have never won a title. So I think you can throw in Baylor into that mix. You could throw Boise State into that mix. And I mean, Boise, I was close putting them into A. You love the blue turf. You love the jerseys. But it's almost like that was like the go-to in NCAA 14. Boise Dynasty for me. Like, if you weren't picking like a Naval Academy or one of those military schools, you always were Boise. And I feel like there might be a little played out right now. But Boise definitely, I'm going to talk myself. We're going to put them in A. We're not going to group them in with the rest of these schools. You know what we will throw in, though? We're going to throw in Boston College in the B tier. Never won it. We're going to throw the Cincinnati Bearcats in there. We are going to throw Kansas State into this tier. We are going to throw the Louisville Cardinal into this tier. We're going to have Missouri. We have North Carolina. I think they're going to have a pretty decent roster as well. Where are the Tar Heels? They're going to go into the B tier. We're going to throw in NC State into this B tier. We're going to throw Northwestern into this B tier. We're going to throw Michigan State into this B tier. We are going to throw Virginia Tech into this B tier. Now, if they have Enter Sandman, if they pay the rights, which there's no chance they do, but if they pay the rights to have the Enter Sandman entrance, I will put them into A tier. But as it stands right now, they're kind of like the bigger-ish program. Probably have some good recruiting, like good starting point there. You don't have to establish a lot of pipelines, and they've never won a title. So there's the argument that makes them appealing. And then we have schools that have had success, like Stanford. I'm almost thinking back to NCAA 14, just because that's what we've most recently played. Teams that are almost always good in NCAA 14, little annoying to want to just pick them up, right? Again, I guess it's been long enough, especially for Stanford. But come on, nerds versus jocks. We are always team freaking jocks in this scenario. We're going to kind of go with a little bit of a rapid fire here. In B, Wake Forest, San Diego, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, Jacksonville State, Troy. Now, Troy, just because you kind of can be the big dog competing against Alabama, are interesting. They just don't have as good of jerseys as the other team from Alabama, which we'll get into. Kennesaw State, one of the newer schools. However, terrible jerseys. I was like, okay, let's go look at this. I saw some people already say, Kennesaw State C4, are they going to be your dynasty? Ass jerseys. Absolute ass. Maryland, they have some success. They're probably going to have a decent roster. Same with Washington State. You have Northern Illinois. We got Tulsa, Western Michigan, Central Michigan, Toledo, Raging Cajuns, South Alabama, Ohio, Cal, Georgia Tech, Charlotte, Virginia, and Akron. Now, these are just like the slightly better schools that fit that same C tier of like, unless you have a personal connection, the jerseys aren't necessarily fire. There's not a whole, unless, maybe if you're anti some of the big dogs. Like, if you are anti-Ohio State, I could see you wanting to pick, Akron or Ohio Bobcats because you want to try to, slowly get rid of their stronghold in the state of Ohio. Or vice versa with Alabama if you want to go with Troy. Or if you want to eventually go with UAB. Or any of these other schools like Louisiana or Michigan's, and you want to just slowly, you hate the Wolverines. I think that's kind of the only argument for picking those schools. I think to round out the B tier, I'm going to throw in Iowa State. I think they've had a pretty competitive roster for the last couple years. I'm going to throw in the Pitt Panthers, kind of in the same mold. I think they're just probably a little too good of a base roster to be I'm going to come in and absolutely take them over. I think you could say that with Syracuse as well. I think you could say that with Duke. We still have South Carolina and Auburn from the SEC that are pretty dang good. This pains me because they're one of the teams that I used to be back in the day. Oklahoma State, probably my favorite jersey combo consistently in college. But they're going to be insane. They got Ollie Gordon, who's likely going to be the highest rated running back in the game. Run game's always overpowered. I'm also going to throw in TCU here as well. It's just the two schools that jerseys are on fire. Pains me not to put them higher, but I think the rosters are going to be a little too good, at least early on, for that long-term dynasty. Maybe if you sim 5 years in and then you want to use that as a starting point, so be it. And to finish up the B tier, my apologies with these schools, but they're also kind of going that logjam of not much to say, pros or cons. UTEP, now I've had my personal feuds with UTEP on social media. This has no factoring over that because I do think picking some of these smaller Texas schools is ambitious, and I appreciate trying to compete and recruit against some of the other big schools in the state of Texas. The challenge is going to be there. Just UTEP doesn't really, Get same with Illinois. Solid defense, kind of a boring team. I got Rice. Now they're on that lower end poll of like, yeah, sure, let's go compete in the state of Texas. But ultimately, unless they put that, they had a pretty cool alternate jersey last year, but not pretty bland. They're as bland as the food that they're named after. And then you got Florida Atlantic, which are kind of mid. I thought, one of those things that for a minute there, when Lane Kiffin was there, they were a very interesting, hot school. They got some guys from like Last Chance U back in the day, but now it's kind of a meh school. Who cares? And actually to finish B with like two big schools. We're going to go Wisconsin. It's going to be easy to recruit offensive linemen. You're always just going to get a lot of 4 stars, 3 stars that you're going to turn into first-round picks. It's what you do. And I'm going to go with Arizona. Now, I'm going with Arizona because they are going to have one of the better rosters, especially one of the better offenses in all of college football. They got Fatita at quarterback, McMillan, who's maybe in the conversation for the best wide receiver in college football. Got some other dogs there as well. And I just think not a lot of work needs to be done earlier on. And who wants to wait 2-3 years into your rebuild to finally have it start feeling like a rebuild? Now moving on to the A tier, I'm not going to make everyone wait and think that I'm going to put Florida in the S tier. No, but I think when you're looking at the SEC, and I'm also going to pigeon in Vanderbilt here because they've always been the whipping boy in the SEC, and to build Vandy up to the Dynasty makes sense. But I think of all the schools that have kind of been good, at least in my memory of college football, that have fallen off, it pains me to say that is the Florida Gators. If you want that big program that you can rebuild, that was once an absolute powerhouse in recent memory, like we don't have to go back to the 70s and 80s, but like has the facilities, the recruiting's not going to be brutal, but a lot of work still needs to be done. I think you got to heavily consider the Florida Gators. Home field advantage is going to be awesome. You need a lot of work, though, to start reestablishing pipelines in Florida, I imagine, if it's anything like real life. I think Miami is also very interesting because you want to try to rebuild the U. That's what I did. Last Dynasty I did when college football NCAA 14 just came out, I did Miami Hurricanes because, let's be honest, no matter how much they spend in the portal, no matter how many big-time recruits, they just can't seem to put it together. But the history of Miami, those old-school teams, still makes the Canes cool. Jerseys are badass. The vibes are still pretty damn cool. So I think, Miami and Florida are kind of like the two big schools that are probably worth your time investing in a rebuild. We're going to kind of look through some bigger schools, but I think the jerseys, the swag, helps them out a little bit. I think Kansas is going to have a pretty good roster, pretty good offense. I love the jerseys they brought back last year. I think Houston, especially assuming they're going to keep the blue jerseys, I think there was some sort of legal battle going on between them and the Titans. But those baby blues are absolutely fire. I think Central Florida jersey combos are on point. I think Arizona State jerseys are on point. I think you need to take a look at Tulane's jerseys are on point, and I've had a lot of requests. Probably the number one team when I've made posts about like who should I pick as my starting dynasty in college football. Tulane was up there. Jerseys are on point. Jerseys are on fire. They look pretty badass. I'm also going to throw in Western Kentucky. They're another school, I'll tell you right now, that I'm considering. Florida International with those Vice jerseys. Absolute fire. I like Marshall's green, the Thundering Herds green. Plus, you get the We Are Marshall storyline. Maybe you get Randy Moss to come back, be your coach. Fun school. I also think in the A tier, that's where Colorado needs to come off. They're going to be the casual pick. And if you were planning on doing college, don't take that as a negative. All right? Very interesting. Prime time. All that stuff, plus the future. Like what happens when Shador and Shiloh leave? Keeping that on, continuing to build that program back up. Very interesting. I just think from a popularity standpoint, they're probably going to be the hottest team that everyone wants to do their dynasty on. Because of that, I can't put them in S. I think you have SMU as an interesting team. Hell, throw out the death penalty storyline. You can do that with Baylor as well. But I think bringing back to the the Pony Express, or what they would call them back in the day, that'd be pretty cool, man. Especially if, like in FIFA, where you can kind of, in the settings, when you're initially setting up your dynasty, set how big of a budget that you can have for the NIL, for the transfer portal. If you're looking at smaller schools that you realistically could pump an insane amount of cash into, I think SMU falls into that. I assume you could put BYU into that. I mean, there's probably some pretty big Mormon donors. You could act like this super church takes them over and wants to take over football. You got a lot of storylines there. Right? You got Rutgers. Just kind of make them New York, just, I don't know, New York, New Jersey, just make them the big team from like that. Just rebrand them as the New York school if you wanted to. Same with Temple, the Philly school. How will we make them good? Then speed running some of these other schools in the A tier. We have South Florida, cool jerseys. State of Florida, tough competition. East Carolina has badass jerseys. We've got the Roadrunners and Sam Houston to compete in Texas. Same with the Mean Green. We got the Aggies, who are kind of like a template cupcake school team builder idea. It's still, it's one of those things, if you are somehow an Aggies fan, it's been 10 years and you're still very much in that discussion, which is pretty bad. You got Bowling Green, Texas State, James Madison, Old Dominion as, good cupcake, build them up into a dynasty. Wyoming got a lot of love in the reveal trailer. So that might make me think, like, depending on how much of this setting, right, the presentation, that there's so much promotion right now in College Football 25. They got the presentation right. They got a lot of love, Wyoming, in the trailer. So maybe they're going to have more than other schools, which could make them a little bit more of a desirable team. You got Colorado State, especially if you just want to try to destroy Deion Sanders. If you hate everything that Deion Sanders stands for and you think he's ruining college football, just go beat Colorado State and try to ruin everything they try to do. And the last team we're going to throw in is UMass, with the same kind of conversation as, South Florida, Temple, the Aggies, Texas State, Old Dominion. They were god-awful in NCAA 2014, and they're still terrible. So they are your token terrible, lowest rated. I'm just going to pick the lowest rated team and rebuild them. Now, I'm not going to lie. Didn't really rehearse this list. I'm torn. I think I got a little too many teams left. I like that you guys can't see it. A little too many teams left for the S tier. So I'm going to make a couple moves. I'm going to throw UAB into the A tier. I think the jerseys are pretty cool, especially if they go with the new ones they unveiled this year. Head coach, Trent Dilfer, hilarious, right? Like one of the worst. I think the story on Trent Dilfer is like the worst quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl. He's in that conversation. But they have a lot of cool jerseys, and it's the new dynasty in Alabama. I think slight advantage over Troy because of the jersey combos. That is as you asked AI to create like the worst generic logo of all time for like Madden 05. That's what they are going with their logo. But I think they kind of fit into that mold. And this might pain some people, but I think I got to put them, because I personally never have desired to rebuild these teams, even though I understand the absolute appeal. But like the military schools, Air Force, Army, and Navy. I appreciate trying to take these schools over and either embracing the triple offense, right? Or transitioning them to more of a pass-heavy, more traditional type offense and just completely rebuilding the program. I appreciate that. It's just maybe because I'm Canadian, I'm not American, I don't truly appreciate that as much as maybe a patriotic person, one of you patriots out there that's watching this. But I still respect it. I'm not going to disrespect them by putting them anything lower than the A tier. So I feel pretty good about that. To roll into my S tier schools, and I will say, these are not just the teams I'm right now. I'll tell you right now, Tulane and Western Kentucky. These are two schools that I am personally considering now for my dynasty. I'm not putting them all in the S tier, but these are teams that, for me personally, I think the discussion needs to be had. We're gonna put App State in there. The Giant Killers, vibes are immaculate. Stadium vibes are immaculate. Small enough program that, kind of like Boise, they've had a lot of success recently. Roster's probably going to be pretty good for their conference, but they're always still like the underdog Giant Killer team, I think. And I think that appeal, that mystique still surrounds App State. I'm going to also throw in Texas Tech. Now, this might be hot take, but they were my favorite team. My very first, before I was a Gator fan, my very back in the beginnings, I love the Red Raiders. I love their jerseys. I love Mike Leach. And I think to honor Mike Leach, you rebuild the Texas Tech Air Raid. The jerseys are on point. They're kind of the best, worst team in Texas. That's still not complete cupcake, right? You're not going Sam Houston. You're not going UTSA. You're not going UTEP, Rice. Got a little bit better of a starting point, but still a long ways to go, right? And you could act like a storyline. Patrick Mahomes gives you guys ridiculous NIL money. If you want to try to compete on that standpoint, you want to inject some cash. There's not, ridiculous hurdles you need to use to justify really improving Texas Tech if you can do that. But maybe a hot take put them in X. I think if other people made this video, you're not going to see Texas Tech that high. I think that's what's adding a little bit of flavor to my video. I'm also going to throw Coastal Carolina in there. Party school. Myrtle Beach. Jerseys are on point. Fun. I think a very fun team. Love their jerseys. I'm going to throw in terms of vibes. West Virginia is making the S tier. And I would say after Tulane, the top requested dynasty that I've got is West Virginia. Now, obviously, this is another one. Much like, going down to Virginia Tech, if they can get the licensing, if they can have John Denver playing all the time, easy S tier, I think, for most people. But I appreciate what West Virginia is. I appreciate where they've been stagnant for a little bit. They need that refresher of a dynasty. And I think it'd be a fun team. And they have some good players. Quarterback's pretty decent. They have a beast of a run, like a 230-pound beast running back. That would be pretty fun to utilize there. We're going to throw in UNLV. I think they're getting a little bit of an influx of cash. They're finally starting to flex a little bit of the city, of the market that they're in. Maybe, again, don't necessarily know how all the recruiting's going to be, but they have huge high schools there, right? Like those fake schools that are clearly, let's just put freak athletes all together and then let them get an easy pathway to the next level, to post-secondary college football. But UNLV, I always think there's a lot of good vibes there in terms of making UNLV into a big-time dynasty. And I think they're definitely one of those schools that once you establish yourself, very fun to move them to a bigger conference, right? Let's have a big contender in Vegas. I'm going to go with Nebraska. I think in terms of former glory, rebuilding themselves, more so than the Gators and the U that are going in this tier, I think Nebraska needs help bad. Nebraska, at one point in time, was the dynasty. They were the best team. They beat everybody. And it has been a very long time since that. So I think in terms of the big schools that need a complete overhaul to get back to the glory days, none more so than Nebraska Cornhuskers, which is why I'm putting them in the S tier. And my final S tier school is really the only team in the S tier that I think I'm considering right now for my dynasty, and that's Hawaii. Now, I hope to God they put some retro jerseys in here. I hope they don't skimp out on the jerseys. If they have the rainbow jerseys, it might be what makes me not even care about Team Builder. Hawaii is like the ultimate home field advantage. If you made Hawaii good, right? They got Tommy Chong as their head coach, right? Great player. And in the spirit of Colt Brennan, if you could bring them back to the Colt Brennan era, where like they just dumped 60 points on everybody, undefeated, biggest pain in the ass for all these other teams to have traveled to, middle of nowhere, you have the ultimate home field advantage. The jerseys are on point, the vibes are immaculate, the history is there. I truly do think, out of all these schools, the number one S tier, perfect situation team builder, as long as they put the retro rainbow uniforms in, are the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. Is that a hot take? I don't think it's that hot. But I would love to hear what you guys think about my ranking list here. I don't think we got too much wrong. I think maybe there's a shot some of these teams that I just didn't have a pro or a con. Someone might say, well, C4, if they had these third jerseys in, these third jerseys are S tier. I could be swayed there. But I think generally speaking, not a lot of movement, not a lot of persuading could we have on these rankings. And I think really any of these teams from B up, you're not going to have a bad time with. I think, again, if you're a fan of one of the bigger teams in the C tier, like you're a homer, also no issues. Just don't be Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan. Just don't do it. Just don't do. Why? Play now. Use them and play now. Play Ultimate Team. Build up your super team. Don't do that with Dynasty. That's not what the spirit of Dynasty mode is about. Come on. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. As always, let me know in the comment section below what team you are going to be using first in your College Football 25 Dynasty. Did I nail my list? Is there a school I got absolutely wrong? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, if it's your first time stopping by, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button. College football content is coming, and it's going to be coming very, very fast. Pause. But we're absolutely going off. This is going to be the hugest year in the channel's history. So hop along for the ride. Hit that subscribe button. We'd love to hit 170,000 subscribers before College Football 25 drops. I will see you guys back here tomorrow with a brand new rebuild. Plan is on Sunday. New episode of NCAA Honey Hunters Football. And until that time, it's your boy C4 saying peace. I love you. Have a good one.